You are not a Microsoft slave. You own your device. Take your freedom back. Dump Windows, otherwise it will own you.
You are not a Microsoft slave. You own your computer. But Windows 11 is slowly taking that away. What if I told you the real reason people are leaving Windows is not just bugs or performance, it's something much bigger. In this video, I'm going to show you why millions of users are walking away from Windows 11, and why once they leave, they never come back. And by the end of this, you might start seeing your computer very differently. Windows updates are supposed to be simple. You install them, things get better, and everyone moves forward. But something strange happened with Windows 11. Instead of people upgrading, people started resisting. And that's weird, because Windows has always followed one rule. Once people start upgrading, it keeps growing. But Windows 11 didn't follow that rule, and that's where things start to break. Normally, operating systems follow a very predictable pattern. At first, adoption is slow, then more people upgrade over time. New computers come with the new version, companies start adopting it, and eventually, it becomes the standard. This has happened with almost every version of Windows. Even versions people didn't love still grew. Why? Because upgrading was the path of least resistance. You didn't have to think about it. It just happened. But Windows 11 didn't follow that pattern. Instead of steady growth, it slowed down, then it stalled. And in some cases, people just didn't move at all. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Delaying an upgrade is normal, but actively avoiding it, that's different. That's rejection. And rejection means something is wrong. So Microsoft did what they always do. They increased the pressure. More upgrade prompts, more reminders, more notifications. But instead of working, it made things worse. Because now it didn't feel like a suggestion. It felt like they were pushing people. And people don't like being pushed, especially when it comes to something personal like their own computer. So users started asking a different question. Not, should I upgrade? But why are they trying so hard to make me upgrade? And that question changed everything. Because once users start questioning the intention behind an update, trust begins to break. Upgrading stops being automatic and becomes a decision, and decisions slow everything down. Now here's the part that really matters. Microsoft used their strongest weapon, fear. They said Windows 10 would lose support and users would be at risk. And normally, that works. But this time, many people didn't move. They paused. They thought about it. And some decided, I'd rather take the risk than upgrade. That's not normal behavior. That's a signal. A signal that something is fundamentally wrong. And it leads to the next question. What made users feel like upgrading was actually worse than staying where they were? People didn't just dislike Windows 11. They were genuinely frustrated. Not the kind of frustration you get from a small bug, but the kind that builds up over time. The kind that makes you stop and think, why am I even using this? They described it as intrusive, annoying, slower than before, overcomplicated for no reason, and on the surface, that sounds like normal complaints. Every operating system gets criticized, but this felt different. Because it wasn't just one issue. It was a pattern. Small things stacking on top of each other. An update that changes something you liked. A setting that's harder to find. A feature you didn't ask for. A notification that won't go away. Individually, none of these seem like a big deal. But together, they create friction. And friction changes behavior. At first, people try to ignore it. Then they try to fix it. Then they start getting tired of fixing it, and eventually, they start thinking about leaving. Now here's what makes this important. Switching operating systems is not easy. You have to learn new tools, move your files, change your habits. It takes time. So for someone to even consider that, the frustration has to be strong, stronger than the comfort of staying. And that's exactly what started happening. People weren't just complaining anymore. They were saying things like, I'd rather switch to Linux. I'm thinking about getting a Mac. That's a big shift because for years, Windows was the default. You didn't question it, you just used it. But now, people are questioning it. And once that happens, something changes. Because the moment users realize they have options, loyalty disappears. And that leads to a bigger question. What pushed users from being slightly annoyed to seriously considering leaving altogether? Because the answer to that is where everything starts to escalate. At first, upgrading to Windows 11 sounded simple. Just install the update and move on. But when people actually looked at what it required, they realized it wasn't that simple. It was a trade. Windows 11 didn't just ask you to update your software, it asked you to change how you use your computer. First, the hardware requirements. Perfectly working computers suddenly became unsupported, not because they were slow, but because they didn't meet certain rules. So now, users had a choice. Keep a machine that works fine, or spend money on a new one they didn't need. That's where the first resistance started. But it didn't stop there. Upgrading also meant giving up control. You were pushed to create a Microsoft account, which means your computer is no longer just local, it's connected to their system. Then came cloud integration. Your files, settings, and backups slowly moving online, not because you chose it, but because the system keeps pushing you there. And for some people, that's useful. But for others, it feels like losing control. Now add background processes running all the time, syncing, updating, collecting data, even when you're not using them. And then the newer layer, AI features, built into the system, working in the background. Most users don't fully understand them, only that they're there. So upgrading is no longer just a technical decision, it becomes a personal one. You're not just asking, is this better? You're asking, what am I giving up? And for many users, the cost started to feel higher than the benefit. So some people made a surprising decision. They didn't upgrade, even knowing Windows 10 would lose support. They looked at everything and thought, I'd rather stay where I am. And that tells you something important, because when people are willing to accept risk, just to avoid moving forward, it means the upgrade doesn't feel like progress. It feels like a loss. And once it feels like a loss, people stop moving forward. They start looking for a way out. At this point, users were already frustrated, but then something changed. Microsoft stopped suggesting and started forcing. Before, you had options. You could skip things, delay updates, set things up your way. Now, those options started disappearing. You were pushed to sign in with a Microsoft account. You were pushed to stay connected to the internet. You were pushed to use their services. And every update made it harder to say no. It didn't feel like your computer anymore. It felt like a system you had to follow. Now here's the problem. People don't mind new features. They don't even mind change, but they do mind losing control. And that's what this felt like. Control slowly shifting away from the user and toward the company. At first, it's subtle. A missing option here, a forced setting there, but over time, it adds up. And users start to notice. They start asking, why can't I just use my computer the way I want? And once that question appears, frustration turns into resistance. Because now it's not about features anymore. It's about control. And when people feel like control is being taken away, they push back. They look for workarounds. They try to bypass restrictions. And when that doesn't work, they start looking for alternatives. And that's when this stops being just an annoying update and becomes something users actively want to escape from. Up to this point, users were frustrated. But now, this is where things became personal, because it stopped feeling like bad decisions and started feeling like betrayal. Let's start with the first one. Forced Microsoft accounts. Before, you could just turn on your computer and use it. Simple. Now, you're pushed to sign in. Your device is no longer just yours. It's tied to an account, to a system, to a company. And that changes the relationship completely because now access to your own computer depends on something outside of it. Second, ads inside the operating system. Think about that for a second. You pay for your device, you use your computer to work, study, create, and now the system itself is showing you ads, not a website, not an app. The operating system. For many users, that crossed a line because it made Windows feel less like a tool and more like a platform trying to sell to you. Then comes the constant push toward the cloud. Your files, your backups, your documents, everything's slowly being moved to OneDrive. And it's not presented as a choice, it's presented as the default, as the better option. But not everyone wants that. Some people want full control over their files, and when that choice starts disappearing, it creates tension. Now add to that the newest layer. AI features built directly into the system. Tools that can analyze what you do, suggest things, track patterns, and in some cases, even record activity. For many users, this wasn't exciting. It was uncomfortable because it raised a simple question: how much is this system actually watching? And more importantly, can I fully control it? When users don't know the answer to that, they stop trusting the system. And when trust starts to break, every feature feels suspicious, even the good ones. So what started as frustration turned into something deeper, a feeling that the system is no longer working for you, but working on you. And that's a dangerous shift, because once users feel that, they don't try to fix it. They start thinking about leaving altogether. Up to this point, everything we've talked about explains the frustration, but this is where things change, because people are no longer just complaining. They're acting on it. They're leaving. Not just talking about it. Not just thinking about it. Actually leaving the Windows ecosystem. And that's a big deal, because for decades, Windows was the default. You didn't choose it. You just ended up using it. It came with your computer. It worked well enough, and switching away felt complicated. But that's no longer true. Now people are moving to Linux, they're switching to macOS, some are even choosing Chromebooks for simplicity, and here's the key shift. Switching used to feel like a risk. Now staying feels like the bigger risk. That's a complete reversal, because once the fear of leaving disappears, people start exploring. And once they try something else, they realize something important. There are real alternatives that are simpler, more stable, or just feel more under their control. And once that realization happens, something clicks, because now Windows is no longer the only option. It's just one option. And when that happens, loyalty disappears. People start rebuilding everything somewhere else. Their apps, their files, their workflows. They learn new systems. They adapt faster than they expected. And once they get comfortable, they don't come back. Because going back would mean giving up everything they just rebuilt. And most people won't do that. So every user that leaves is not just a temporary loss. It's permanent. And when enough people make that decision, it starts to change the entire ecosystem. Because now it's not just about one user leaving. It's about momentum shifting in a completely different direction. And if you're starting to notice something, this isn't just about Windows. This is a pattern happening across tech. Companies are slowly taking more control while users get less. And most people don't notice until it's too late. If you like understanding how this works in simple terms, you'll probably want to stick around, because this pattern shows up everywhere. This isn't just individuals. Businesses are noticing it too. Companies are rolling back updates. Teams are switching systems. Developers are losing interest. And when developers leave, platforms shrink. Because software follows developers, not companies. At first, nothing looks broken. The platform is still there. People are still using it. Everything seems normal. But underneath, something starts to shift. Because platforms don't collapse all at once. They collapse slowly. And it usually starts with users. A small group leaves. At first, it doesn't seem important. There are still millions of people using it. But then more users leave, and something changes. Confidence starts to drop. People begin asking, is this still the best option? Should I look for something else? And once that doubt appears, behavior changes. Now developers start paying attention. They follow where users go. They build for other platforms. And when developers shift, the ecosystem weakens. Because platforms depend on the software around them, then businesses react. They want stability, so they test alternatives, small changes at first, then bigger ones. And once they switch, they rarely go back. So now you have a chain reaction. Users leave, developers follow, businesses adapt, and little by little, the platform loses strength. Until one key moment happens. It stops being the default and becomes just another option. And once that happens, it has to compete again. And competing is much harder than staying on top. Windows used to be simple. You owned your computer. It worked for you. It stayed out of your way. But Windows 11 changed that. Now it's more control from the company, less control for the user, more monetization, less trust, and that's the real issue. Not performance, not bugs, trust. Once trust is broken, people don't wait, they leave. So here's the real question. Would you stay with an operating system that treats you like a data source instead of a user? And if you think this is only happening to Windows, you might want to pay attention because something very similar is happening with AI tools right now.